Hello guys, welcome to another webinar, a very informative webinar from the SalesIQ series. So in this webinar, we'll be focusing on how to build a Zobot using the Watson platform. So I'll quickly run you through the steps that you will have to follow to get the Zobot running on your website. So let's get started right away. So what is a Zobot? It's basically a bot development platform available inside SalesIQ, with which SalesIQ users can build very compelling bots to automate customer interactions. So we can program these bots to act, to respond, and to qualify customers. They maintain conversations with the users in natural language. They understand the intent of the user, and they send a response based on the business rules and the data of the organization. Remember that you can use and run these Zobots on both websites and on mobile applications. What is SalesIQ? So there might be a few of you who attended our previous webinars who are familiar about what SalesIQ is, and or you also might have read about it. So for those of you who are new to this, let me brief you on what SalesIQ is. So it's a hassle-free live chat software designed for customer support, business growth, sales, marketing, customer engagement, and so much more. So this is basically live chat, visitor tracking, audio calls, mobile SDKs, powerful chatbots, which is obviously our Zobot, and so much more rolled onto one platform. So in this webinar, we'll focus on Zobots, their skills, how they can help your business, and how to build a simple Zobot. So building a Zobot with a Watson platform. So what does the Watson platform consist of? So the Watson Assistant powered by IBM helps you build a powerful bot assistant for your website like any other platform. So you can customize the Watson Assistant according to your website business needs and deploy it across multiple channels to help bring to your customers the required help whenever and wherever they need it. So the Watson Assistant is basically an offering for building conversational interfaces into any website or application. So most chatbots in the market, they try to mimic human interactions, which can frustrate users when a misunderstanding arises. So the Watson platform, on the contrary, knows when to search for an answer from a knowledge base, when to ask the visitor for clarity, and when to direct visitors to a human. So you can integrate the Watson Assistant you have built with a Zobot and then let them serve your website visitors effectively. So what are the steps we're going to be following? We'll configure basic Zobot information, authenticate the Watson Assistant, configure trigger responses, then we'll create dialogue skills, intents, and assistance. Then we have dynamic text and all of that. So now the working. So basically, like every other platform, when the visitor lands on the website, the Zobot checks if the visitor matches the trigger rule, and if he does, it responds with the trigger message. Otherwise, it waits for the visitor to begin the chat or send a response. All right. So when that message from the visitor's side comes in, the Watson platform will match the dialogue or the anything else node. So we'll be looking at what the dialogue node and the anything else node are later during this webinar. So it matches the nodes and then it will start collecting parameters. It will check for other Watson service actions and finally respond with a dialogue response. So that's how the Watson platform works. Alright, so now we'll start creating an assistant in Watson. So first you will have to log in to the IBM Watson, the IBM Cloud platform. You need to create an account and log into your IBM Cloud account. And on the left menu, we will navigate to Watson. So before you create an assistant inside Watson, you will not be able to start configuring it and mapping it to the Zobot. So our first task will be creating assistants and configuring whatever we require inside the Watson platform. All right. So you will land, when you click on Watson, you will land on the Build with Watson page. Click on Watson Services. Alright, so if you're a new user, then you can create a service by clicking on Browse Services. There are a huge list of APIs in the catalog that you can choose from. Or if you have an existing service, then you can click on the existing service and choose the service name under the Services section. So you have two different options here. Alright. So when you click on the service, you will be able to see the API key and the URL that you can use. They are the credentials that you will use to integrate and map the Watson Assistant to your Zobot. Okay, so let's simultaneously start setting up our Zobot. So inside your SalesIQ portal, navigate to Settings, Zobot, and then click Add Bot. So you will give your bot a name and you will also add a description as always. And then you will choose the website on which you want to configure your Zobot. And then comes the department. So it's mandatory that you choose at least one department for the website that you have chosen. Choosing more than one is totally up to you, but choosing one is mandatory. And then you will set the visitor type. So the default here in the visitor type, that is the visitors to whom you want the Zobot to trigger a message, will be set to all visitors. So you can modify this criteria whenever you want to, and so you can modify this criteria whenever you want to. You can choose from a huge list of conditions. You can categorize them based on city, country, department, IP address, landing page duration, and so much more. So once you're done setting up the conditions, you will click on Apply. You can also add additional conditions using OR and AND. So I'm clicking on Apply. I'm going to stick to the default condition. And then we will set when we want the Zobot to trigger the visitor. Following that, we'll set up bot working hours. So I'm going to stick to round the clock. You can either configure it to be just during business hours and non-business hours, or just when your operators are offline. And we're going to set the bot typing status. And I'm also allowing handoff in case visitors are in the middle of the conversation with a Zobot and they suddenly feel the need to connect to a human operator. I want them to be able to do so, so I'm enabling handoff. And then the platform choosing. So in this webinar, our platform will be the Watson Assistant. So here is where we will use the credentials that we had obtained after creating a service inside the Watson platform. So the host URL and the API key. So I'm going to copy these credentials. And I'm going to paste them inside the SalesIQ portal and click Save. Alright, so my host URL and my API key have been configured. The integrated person's name will be displayed here. You can click Change to integrate a different Watson Assistant account. So if you're a portal owner or an administrator who created the Watson Assistant connection, then the Access Watson Resources button will appear on the right corner of the window. So when I click on Create, do you see this? There is a prompt to enter the assistant ID. So which is where we'll be focusing on creating the assistant inside the Watson platform. And then we'll be copying the assistant ID from the platform and pasting it inside the Zobot. So this is going to be mapping the Zobot and the Watson Assistant. So let's go back to our IBM portal. So I'm just going to click on Launch Watson Assistant. So an assistant ID is basically given to the bot to differentiate one from another. That is, each Watson Assistant created in your IBM Cloud account will have a distinguished assistant ID. So you can use the ID to deploy the assistant in your Zobot to connect to website visitors. So if you wish to change the assistant, you can change the assistant ID, and the bot you wish to deploy will be deployed. So remember that you should have an IBM Cloud account again and an assistant built in it to get the assistant ID. So now let's create the assistant ID. So inside the assistants tab, I'm going to click on create assistants. The previously created assistants are all here, right? So you can either delete or you can change the settings of the assistants that you had created earlier. You can do all of that inside this dashboard. So I'm going to click on create assistant. So I'm going to give my assistant a name. Okay, and I'm going to add a description. And I'm going to click create. So yes, So my assistant has been created. So now I'm going to go ahead and click on the settings of the assistant, and I'm going to navigate to API details, and I'm going to copy the assistant ID here, go back to my SalesIQ portal, and I'm going to paste it here. So my assistant ID has been generated and I have pasted it inside the SalesIQ portal. Now comes configuring the trigger response. So the trigger response is technically where you configure the message that you want to trigger to your website visitors. So this can be either plain text or a combination of plain text and rich text. You have a bunch of samples inside our user documentation. So I'm going to show you where this is. So I'm going to go to the Watson Assistant and click on authentication. And I'm just going to copy a small bit of a plain text trigger message, and I'm going to paste it inside my trigger response section, and I'll just make small changes because my assistant's name is different. So I can also configure action failure responses I can also configure action failure responses for situations like when messages come in after standard business hours, or when operators are not available, or when operators do not exist. So there are default responses for all of these configured. So you can make changes to these responses in case you want to, or you can stick to the default responses. So now that all of these details are configured, I'm going to go ahead and click on create. Okay, my bot has been created successfully. So I can access my Watson Assistant resources section right from the Zobot preview window. All right. So if you're a portal owner or an administrator who created the Watson account connection, then the Access Watson Resources button will appear on the top right corner. So next we look at how to create dialogue skills. So a dialogue skill is basically a container for the artifacts that define the flow of a conversation that your assistant can have with your website visitor. All right. So I'm going to show you how to create a skill. So I'm going to navigate to the skills section and click on create skill, dialogue skill, and next. So I'll just type in my skill name. So give your skill a name and a description, and if the dialogue you plan to use will use a different language other than English, then choose the appropriate language from the list, and then you can click on create, and you will land on the intents page of the tool. So creating intents. This is basically adding training data that was built by IBM to your workspace by adding intents from a content catalog. In particular, you will give your assistant access to the general content catalog so that your dialog can greet users and it can end conversations with them. So in the Watson Assistant tool, click on the Intents tab and then click Create Intent. Give your intent a name. Let me just say hello, and I'm going to add a description and I'm going to click Create Intent. So I'm just going to give in a user example here as well. All right. And I'm going to go back. So yes, my intent has been created. Next is creating a dialogue. A dialogue basically defines the flow of your conversation in the form of a logic tree. So this matches intents, that is what users say, to responses, that is what the bot says back. So each node of the tree has a condition that triggers it based on the user input. So we'll create a simple dialogue that handles greeting and ending intents, each with a single node. All right. So I'm going to click on Create Dialogue. So here it is. So the two default nodes that are available once you create a new dialog, the two different nodes that are defaultly available are the welcome node and the anything else node. So you can configure responses inside this section. So let me just add a new node and I'm just going to enter a name. So this is probably to end conversation. So let me just say end. So you can also enter conditions. All right. So I'm just going to say end and then respond with text. So I'll just enter some sample response here. So I'm just going to add a new node here, all right, and I'm going to enter a name and I'm going to enter a condition. So this is going to be a welcome message. So I'm going to just add welcome triggers and then I'm going to choose to respond. So I can choose the type of response that I want to send out to my visitors. So this can either be text or option, pause or images. So I'm going to stick to text and then I'll enter my response text. Let me say, hello there. All right, so I have added my response and then I'll finally wait for the user input. So I have different options here, or I can wait for the user's input or I can jump to, and once I'm done, I'm going to close the editor by clicking on the X. All right, so my welcome intent has been configured. So I've configured a welcome message for the visitors when they land on my website and match the criteria. All right, so that's how you create nodes inside Dialogs. So now that we've looked at all of the different options that we have and all of the different configurations that we will have to create for the Watson platform, let me just give you a quick recap of how you will set up the Zobot and map it to your Watson assistant. So you will click on Add Bot and then enter your bot's name. You will add a description and choose the website that you want to trigger the Zobot on. And following that, you will choose the departments that you want the bot to take up chats for. Then you will set visitor type. Then you will set visitor type when you want the visitor to be triggered. And then the working hours of the Zobot. You will also configure the bot typing status. And you will allow handoff in case you require and choose the Watson platform. So inside the Watson platform, there are 3 different credentials that have to be entered in order to map your Zobot to the Watson assistant. So this will be the host URL, the API key, and the assistant ID. So when you choose when you create a service inside the Watson platform, you will obtain the API key and the URL, which you will copy paste inside your SalesIQ portal. Following which you will create an assistant inside the Watson platform and then navigate to the settings section of the assistant and copy the API ID, the assistant, you will navigate to the API details section and copy the assistant ID and paste it here. Following which you will configure trigger responses and action failure responses and create the Zobot. So this will map the Watson assistant to your Zobot. So So the Zobot not only allows the use of plain text for your responses, like I had already mentioned, it also lets you use rich text like images and two different types of cards, input cards and display cards. So input cards are basically used to obtain inputs from the visitor's side, all right, to save them the trouble of typing. You can give them response suggestions. You can make your chat window more appealing using these input cards. So I'll show you some of the very commonly used input cards. You have response suggestions, then you have calendars to set up meetings for you and keep track of them. And then you have two types of feedback widgets, happiness and star rating, to know what your visitors are talking about your brand. And you also have the location widget to offer location based services. So these are the very commonly used ones, but there's so much more to this. You have calendars, range calendars, sliders, range sliders, and so much more. You have a wide range of options to choose from. And then come the display cards, which will display output to the users. So in this case, you have three options. You have the option of displaying URLs to your website visitors inside the live chat widget. You can give them access to articles and FAQs right from the chat window. And you have the option of using images. So these can be used in combination with both articles and URLs. So they make your chat window more appealing. So dynamic text in Watson. So the text that can change is called dynamic text. I'll show you how to configure dynamic text inside the Watson platform. So I'm going to click on edit. So in my case, I want to be greeting my visitors with their name. So I'm going to configure dynamic text accordingly. So I'm just going to go inside my trigger message and enter %visitor.name. So the dynamic text inside the SalesIQ platform is always enclosed in between two percentage symbols. All right. So I've done the changes and I'm going to click on save. All right. Now I'm going to go ahead to the visitor info and I'm going to change the visitor name and click save, and I'm going to refresh my window. Do you see this? The message has been triggered along with the name of the visitor. So in case you want to send out a personalized, more personalized proactive chat invite to your visitors when they visit your website, you can make use of dynamic text. So there's a huge list of dynamic text that you can choose from. So let me show you where the list is. You can take a look at this inside the basics of the Watson platform. So when you navigate to the bottom of this page, you will see the list of different dynamic text that you can make use of inside your trigger responses and chat responses. So you can choose visitor department, visitor name, email, page title, page URL, and so much more. So that's it about the Watson platform. Don't forget to check out our developer documentation and our code sample section. So the samples in the code sample section are just for your training and reference, and you cannot submit them to us for the final submission. And if you have any questions, any queries regarding the webinar that we had taken you through today, please write to us at contact@clicktricks.com and we will get back to you as soon as we can. And I will see you in the next webinar. Until then, happy Zobotting.